The morning light was doing everything right. It caught the stone facade of Varenhold Estate at an angle architects dream about, at precisely the hour when Victorian Gothic looks like a heritage listing rather than a threat. The wisteria hadn't finished claiming the east wing windows. The iron fencing, wrought and elaborate, framed the property the way a museum frames something old and valuable. The sky above the Cascades foothills was the particular clear blue that only happens in early spring, after a week of rain has scrubbed everything, and the gravel approach road was still damp and dark and perfectly quiet. She had been in 100 facilities in worse condition than this. The briefing called it a contained incident, corporate infrastructure irregularity, possible exposure event, standard asset assessment and liability documentation. She had a kit in the back seat, UV pen light, access card reader, field recorder, the incident packet from Axiom Security with the access codes and the floor plans. She had read 28 of the packet's 30 pages on the flight in. She would read the appendix after the walkthrough.
The keys are situated next to the open text, facing away from the engine. Significant residue.
Her radio crackled once as she stepped out. Axiom Security Dispatch, confirming her arrival window, confirming the access codes were current, confirming the research team had departed the property 7 weeks prior, following what the dispatch officer described as an equipment malfunction. The equipment malfunction that had apparently caused 6 researchers to leave their coffee, their reading glasses, their car keys, and apparently, based on the vehicle count in the East Side Bay, 2 of their 3 vehicles. She made a note, filed it under what her training called indicators requiring contextual investigation. Walked through the iron gate and up the approach path toward the estate's main entrance, gravel crunching under her boots in the particular way that sounds very much like being the only living thing for several kilometers. The receiving hall was the kind of space that makes you understand why people built things like this. Black and white marble floors in a pattern that drew the eye forward to the split staircase, a chandelier still burning, amber light over everything, the high plaster ceiling with its original cornicing still intact. Someone had spent money on this building before Axiom acquired it. Someone had loved it. A coffee cup, a paperback novel, open to what she noted as page 112, spine carefully not cracked, the kind of open that means someone set it down to do something and intended to come back. A set of car keys, a pair of reading glasses, folded neatly, placed with the deliberate care of someone who put them down because they needed both hands for something. Cressida made a note. The coffee cup still had residue, meaning it had been drunk, and not just abandoned full, meaning the departure was not immediate. The reading glasses, folded, not knocked over, not dropped, meaning there was time for a small courtesy. The car keys, these she photographed. The vehicle registration number would be in the containment records if they existed. She was already certain they would not. Indicators of orderly departure under non-orderly circumstances. Whoever left last was not panicking, was taking care, was leaving things in order. That's not better. She moved through the receiving hall and into the East Wing corridor, the research team's working area, according to the floor plan. The offices were as they'd been left, data stations with screens still dark, powered down but not turned off, a small infirmary with the supply cabinet open and 3 things removed from the upper shelf, the items around them undisturbed. Someone had needed something specific and taken exactly that. Not immediately wrong. The first room she checked looked like water damage, brownish traces along the wall near the ventilation grate, the kind of thing a building inspector would flag as a minor moisture issue. But it followed the grate. It followed the air movement. And in the third room, near where a desk had been pushed against the wall and a chair placed directly below a return vent, the traces were denser. She took out the UV pen light. She would not turn it on yet. She filed the traces under organic residue, source unknown, requires chemical analysis. She moved to room 19, which had a locked door and scratch marks on the outside that she photographed from 4 angles and filed under significant. She was making her way back to the main corridor when she heard it, or rather felt it, a change in pressure that her inner ear registered before her brain translated it. Something moving through the ventilation system, something sizable, displacing air as it moved through the ducts above the ceiling. Not mechanical, not the normal cycling of an HVAC system. She did not move for approximately 6 seconds. She had been in facilities before that had retained biological specimens post-incident. She knew the protocols. She also knew that the protocols assumed the investigator had read the full briefing packet, including the appendix, before entering the facility. She moved through the East Wing corridor without breaking stride, found the butler's pantry at the end of the service hallway, found the concealed stairwell exactly where the floor plan said it would not be. The floor plan showed a storage room. The door was reinforced steel with a BioSeal keypad. Her access code worked on the first entry. The sub-basement was white tile and fluorescent light. The lights were running on the building's backup generator. She could hear the generator's low hum somewhere beneath her, and the fluorescence flickered between clinical white and a shade of green that no laboratory lighting is supposed to be. The air was colder than upstairs, pressurized. The ventilation system was running at full capacity down here, running and circulating. The amber glow was everywhere. She looked down at her hands. She did not go back up the stairs. She understood the logic of that later, when she had more information to work with. At the time, standing at the bottom of the sub-basement stairs, with her UV penlight turning her hands amber in the dark, the decision to continue forward felt like professionalism. She had a job. The briefing had not mentioned substrate contamination, but the briefing had also not mentioned what was clearly a significant contamination event, and understanding the scope of that contamination was her job, specifically. 6 containment cells along the left side of the lower corridor, visible through safety glass panels set into the steel doors. 5 empty, BioSeal indicators green, the cells clear and cold and sterile. The 6th had a red indicator, BioSeal breached. The door was sealed, not open. Someone had triggered the external lockdown after the BioSeal failure rather than before it, but the cell itself showed clear evidence of what the briefing was now describing to her, very clearly, through its 30-page body and its unread appendix, as specimen retention failure. Containment breach. Cell 6. External lockdown active. Breach occurred from inside the cell, which was, all things considered, not ideal. The records room was at the end of the cell block, behind a steel door that required a second access code, this one in the briefing packet, page 17. She had read page 17. She entered the code, opened the door, found the filing system and the audio equipment still running on the generator. She had found his first log in the East Wing office, a recording from 11 months prior, detailing the research team's initial findings on the Holloway substrate's neural plasticity effects. Enthusiastic, scientific, the voice of a man doing significant work and knowing it. This was different.
This is Fyodor House, Project Holloway, day 147. I'm recording this in the containment records room because it's the only space below the substrate threshold level that has a functioning recorder. The ventilation modification in the sub-basement was not a contractor error. I have confirmed this. The system was designed to circulate at concentration above the exposure threshold, not to exhaust below it. The installation records, which I should have read on arrival, and which I have only now fully reviewed, specify this modification in the appendix. The substrate, at prolonged concentration above the threshold, does not enhance neural plasticity. It replaces neural plasticity. The brain doesn't reorganize more easily. The brain reorganizes around the substrate. The substrate becomes the governing structure. I don't know what Ilian is anymore. I know what he was. He was the on-site lead. He had been below the threshold line every day for 6 months. And now he's in the lower corridor and he doesn't respond to language, but he responds to pressure differential. He knows the ventilation system better than anyone who studied it. We've been living in the incubator. I think that was always the plan.
Cressida sat with that recording for approximately 45 seconds. She sat with it the way you sit with information that changes the shape of everything that came before it. The ventilation modification in the sub-basement, which she had not read because the appendix was still in her bag, had been designed to maintain substrate concentration above the exposure threshold. She had been breathing sub-basement air since she descended the stairs. The appendix specified the ventilation modification. It also specified the exposure timeline for physiological effect. The substrate's reorganizing influence was not immediate. The first effects were subtle: enhanced pattern recognition, heightened sensitivity to pressure differential, reduced need for verbal language to process spatial information. Then, a gradual decline in higher-level verbal processing. Then, at full integration, what the appendix described as substrate-dominant cognitive architecture. How long she had been breathing this air? Approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I have 40 minutes in me and 6 months in front of me. Well, that's much better. She came out of the records room at a controlled walk and saw it at the far end of the lower corridor. Dr. Ilian Marsh had been 6 feet 2, lean, precise, the kind of researcher whose lab bench was always organized in a specific order. What was in the lower corridor was taller than that, the joints reshaped by something that had grown through the connective tissue and found its own geometry. The skin was intact but translucent in patches, amber lit from somewhere beneath, the biological glow visible even without the UV light. The hands were the worst part. The hands were still human. She did not run. She moved at a controlled walk back toward the cell block, toward the records room, her brain cataloging what Fyodor's log had told her. Pressure differential. It responds to pressure differential. The ventilation system is the map it uses. And she moved to the far side of the cell block where the pressure differential would be lowest, where she would be a dead zone in its spatial reading. It's not tracking visually. Pressure. Air movement. Stay still. Don't displace air. Don't... The pressure equalization system kicked in with no warning. Emergency cycling, something in the building's automated protocol, had triggered a cascade, equalizing pressure between the sub-basement and the estate's main ventilation system. The result was a sudden, system-wide air movement that ran directly through the containment records room, through the cell block, down the lower corridor, directly toward Cressida's position. This is what trained people do in genuine danger. She reached the fire suppression cabinet 20 meters from the records room door, broke the glass with her elbow, pulled the CO2 discharge trigger for the lower corridor. The system was old, installed when the sub-basement was first converted, never updated. It worked. The lower corridor filled with carbon dioxide discharge. Dense, cold, expanding. The thing in the corridor moved wrong in the CO2, lost its pressure differential mapping in the gas displacement, slowed, turned against itself. She ran the cell block corridor while it was disoriented and hit the stairwell door hard enough to leave a mark in the steel. The blast doors were already cycling. She was through the stairwell door and into the butler's pantry with 40 seconds to spare. The blast doors sealed below her with a sound like a bank vault. She was in the estate's main structure, which was safer than the sub-basement and exactly as trapped as it. Elevator requires clearance code. clearance code is not in the briefing. Clearance code is not in the access codes on page 17. Clearance code is... She went back to the briefing packet, read it again. Not the main body, the access codes page. The codes were organized by area. Sub-basement, covered. East wing, covered. Upper floors including... Third floor restricted access, room 47 clearance. She had been in 100 facilities in worse condition than this. She told herself that. If you want to find out whether she was lying, make sure you're subscribed, because what she found in that building, what was already inside her, doesn't end here. She took the stairs to the third floor. She found the library. She had been in 100 facilities. What's left is something more. The room was black. 4 walls, black paint or black panels. In the dark, it was impossible to tell which. 1 chair, positioned precisely before 1 monitor. The monitor's screen was the only light, and it was enough. The list on the screen had 7 names. 3 she recognized from the Varenhold research team's personnel file in her briefing packet. 1 she recognized from Axiom BioSystems' own legal compliance division. 1 she did not recognize. 1 was Fyodor House. She sat down in the chair. Not because she was calm, because the chair was there and her legs were done cooperating. The monitor had 1 active input, a file labeled Holloway Complete /House F/archive. She pressed play.
Particular weight of someone speaking to a future that they believe will come. If you're watching this, you found the room. That means you had the 3 fragment codes, the incident log code, the containment code, and the access card code from the East Wing. Which means you processed this building in order. Which means you were meant to. My name is Fyodor House. I was the ethics lead on Project Holloway. I was brought in to document safety protocols. I was not told, and I should have been told, that Project Holloway's research objective was not the therapeutic application of the substrate. The therapeutic application was the cover material, prepared for the board presentation and the regulatory filings and the academic papers. The actual research objective was behavioral and cognitive. How does a human being function during the integration period? What capabilities emerge? How long does procedural competence survive the substrate's reorganization of the higher cognitive structures? What is the decision-making profile of a person who is both their original self and the substrate's emerging architecture simultaneously? The research team was not informed they were test subjects. They were told they were researchers. The substrate was in the ventilation system from day 1. The 6 months of data they believed they were generating was the data. They were the experiment. I realized this on day 143. I tried to shut it down. I was not able to shut it down. Dr. Marsh's transformation was not a failure. It was the long-term endpoint. It was what they wanted to document. I did not understand this until very late. You are on the list. You have been on the list since this building was sealed. You were selected because you had the specific skill profile the next phase requires. Trained investigation methodology, institutional loyalty, analytical competence. The question the second phase is asking is different from the first. Does a subject who knows about the substrate continue to function within the integration period? Does knowing change the integration? Does the procedural mind survive its own revelation? And they carry everything. I left you the override. It's on this drive. The BioSeal protocol. Full building seal, all ventilation, all integrated biological presence contained. It will hold the lower annex. It will hold what Dr. Marsh became. It will not reverse what you have already breathed. And here is the story's dark comedy, entirely genuine. I also left the elevator code for what it's worth. I'm sorry. I should have read the appendix too.
The drive was behind the monitor, in a panel that required the access card from the East Wing entry table. The horror is intellectual, but it lands like a physical blow. 40 minutes of exposure was not 6 months. She was not Dr. Marsh. She would not be Dr. Marsh. The timeline Fyodor had documented specified that the first 48 hours were in the reversible range. Not certainly reversible, but possibly. She had possibly 48 hours to make it to a facility that could process the substrate. She had come to Varenhold to investigate. She had been sent to Varenhold to complete the experiment. The investigation was the experiment. Every decision she had made, going deeper, reading the briefing instead of the appendix, descending the stairs, using the CO2 suppression system, every competent professional decision had been the anticipated response. She was not the investigator. She sat with that for approximately 30 seconds. Because knowing did not mean stopping. She was still her. The substrate had 40 minutes in her, not 6 months. Her hands were steady when she read the protocol. Her mind organized the steps in sequence without difficulty. BioSeal override required simultaneous input at 3 nodes: the sub-basement generator panel, the third-floor ventilation relay, and the estate's central environmental control, which was in the receiving hall. 3 inputs, timed within a 60-second window. The pressure displacement hit her before she left the library. She ran the BioSeal protocol in her head. 3 nodes, 60-second window. The third-floor ventilation relay was directly opposite the library, through the corridor where the remaining thing now was. The sub-basement generator panel was down 1 level, through the butler's pantry. The receiving hall central control was through the main staircase. Node 3 first. Ventilation relay on this floor. Node 2 from the pantry. Node 1 from the hall. 1 route. 60 seconds. She came out of the library at speed, kept to the wall where the pressure differential was lowest, moved toward the ventilation relay cabinet at the end of the corridor. The remaining thing was midway down the hall, occupying the center where the air moved most freely. It did not react to her visual presence. It was reading air. Later, she would describe this as stealth movement protocol. She had been trained for stealth movement protocol. She had not anticipated that the primary application of this training would be moving silently past what had recently been a research lead's skeletal structure in the third-floor corridor of a Victorian mansion while holding a thumb drive containing incriminating corporate documentation. Life occasionally exceeds the training manual's scope of imagination. She reached the relay cabinet. Input code 1, 9 seconds. The relay activated. She moved. The remaining thing had followed air movement down the staircase and was in the main corridor below her. She crossed the upper landing above it without touching the floor, in a way that would create detectable pressure differential. She would later be unable to fully explain this to anyone, because it required describing the sensation of moving through air as if the air was watching, which was medically accurate and professionally difficult to file. Central Environmental Control Panel, a retrofitted interface installed when Axiom modified the estate systems. Fyodor's third code, 38 seconds into the 60-second window. The building sealed. She stood in the receiving hall. The chandelier was still on. The amber light was still falling on the marble floors. The research team's personal effects were still on the entry table. The coffee cup, the paperback, the reading glasses. The elevator key code was on the drive. She typed it in from the receiving hall panel.
I recognize the smell. It hasn't changed.
She walked through the front door of Varenhold Estate into the same clear morning she had arrived in. The sky was the same color. The iron gate was the same. The wisteria was still moving against the east wing windows in whatever slight wind there was. 2 of the 3 vehicles were still in the east side bay.
The timeline is specific.
It smelled exactly like it had when she arrived. It had always smelled like that. She had been breathing Varenhold's air since she stepped out of her rental. The main building's ventilation was not sub-basement concentration, but it was not clean either. The timeline on the drive specified that the estate exterior had a 6-week clearance window after the sub-basement's last purge. The last purge had been 8 weeks ago. Almost in the way that survival sometimes produces. Fyodor had apologized for the same error, the appendix. There was something almost collegial about that. 2 professionals, 1 building, both reading 28 of 30 pages. In better circumstances, she would have found it an interesting data point about how people process briefing documents under deadline pressure. As circumstances stood, it was merely what it was. She sat on the estate's stone step with Fyodor's drive in her hand. The drive contained the complete Project Holloway documentation, including the real research objectives and the 6-subject trial data. The complete board communications authorizing the modification to the estate's ventilation system. Director Maren Solke's project notes, which had the particular quality of detailed, honest documentation that people write when they believe they will never be held accountable. And a personal note from Fyodor House, addressed to whoever found the room. She read the note. It was brief.
You found the room, you activated the seal, you walked out. That means the integration period didn't take you the way it took Ilian. It might mean you were different from the others. It might mean the knowing changes the integration, the way I hoped it might. Or it might mean you just had enough of yourself left to do your job before the substrate finished its work. I hope you publish this. I hope someone believes you. And I hope, and I mean this sincerely, that the next person who comes to this building reads the whole briefing packet before they go inside.
The final question of the story, never answered aloud, simply held. She sat on the step in the clear morning light, and she turned the drive over in her hands. The amber glow wasn't visible in daylight. She'd need the UV penlight for that. She could feel, somewhere in her peripheral processing, an unusual sensitivity to the air movement around her, to the pressure differential between the estate's stone walls and the open grounds, to the precise location of every vent opening and every surface that disrupted airflow. She had found the forbidden knowledge. She had found all of it, the experiment, the list, the corporation's documentation of exactly what they'd done and why and how carefully they'd prepared the cover story. She had found it. She was holding it.
Holloway files.
But it hadn't finished her either. It had not set her free. But it had given her something Maren Solke had never intended to give her. Fyodor's note, and the drive, and the understanding that the 47 rooms of Varenhold Estate had been designed for her, and that she had walked through all of them. She made one radio call, not to Axiom Security Dispatch, to a number she had kept in the back pages of her field notebook for 2 years, the number of a journalist who had spent those same 2 years documenting corporate research irregularities that went nowhere because no one had hard documentation. She stood up from the stone step of Varenhold Estate. The morning light was still doing everything right, catching the facade at the right angle, making the iron look decorative instead of confining, turning the wisteria on the east wing windows into something that looked like it had always been there and had always been beautiful. The story's final question, held open, not answered. The air smelled the same on the way out as it had on the way in,